You're not poor because it's hard. You're poor because you obey rules designed to keep you harmless, productive, and permanently beneath men who understand power. They told you getting rich is complicated. You need degrees, certifications, 10-step morning routines, advanced investment strategies, market timing, economic forecasts, networking brunches, side hustles, personal branding. An entire ecosystem of noise. But complexity is camouflage. The more complicated something appears, the less you question who benefits from that complexity. Wealth is not complex. It is structurally simple. Own assets, control flows, extract margins, repeat. That is the entire machine. The reason you believe it's difficult is because difficulty protects hierarchy. If the formula were obvious, obedience would collapse. Workers would hesitate. Employees would question. The obedient would become strategic. So the system manufactures confusion. School teaches you how to follow instructions, not how to own outcomes. Corporate life teaches you how to increase value for someone else. Financial media teaches you to react, not to position. Even self-improvement teaches you to optimize yourself for environments you do not control. You are trained to refine the tool, never to become the wielder. Complexity keeps you busy, and busy men don't revolt. They don't redesign the board. They don't study power. They chase productivity. But productivity without ownership is servitude wearing a smartwatch. Look at the wealthy, not the influencers, not the motivational speakers, the actual asset holders. Their wealth rarely comes from complexity. It comes from leverage. They control something scalable, equity, distribution, infrastructure, systems, narratives. Then they allow scale to multiply their decisions. One decision, thousands of outcomes. That is simplicity. You, meanwhile, are told to trade time for increments, work harder, negotiate a 7% raise, add credentials, build experience, stack promotions. Linear growth. But linear growth cannot defeat exponential leverage. So the story must remain: it's hard, it's complicated, it takes decades, it's risky. Be realistic. Realistic is a leash. The truth is colder. Wealth requires 3 things: ownership, leverage, asymmetry. Ownership means you control the asset. Leverage means the asset works without proportional effort. Asymmetry means your upside outweighs your downside. That's it. No romance, no mystery. But if you understood this at 18, you would not worship stability. You would not chase titles. You would not measure yourself by salary. You would measure yourself by control. And control is dangerous to institutions that require predictability. So complexity is installed early. Think about how money is explained to you growing up. Study hard. Get a good job. Be stable. Climb the ladder. Invest slowly. Don't take big risks. Notice what's missing. Ownership language. You are taught how to survive within a system, not how to bend it. Even entrepreneurship is packaged as chaotic, risky, unstable, something only special people do. The myth of genius protects the gate. But most wealthy individuals are not geniuses. They are positioned. Position beats intelligence. A mediocre man who owns a scalable asset will outturn a brilliant man selling hours. That is the simplicity they hide. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin asking different questions. Instead of, how can I earn more? You ask, what can I own? Instead of, how can I work harder? You ask, how can I design leverage? Instead of, how can I impress employers? You ask, how can I reduce dependence? That shift alone is destabilizing. It moves you from participant to observer. And observers start noticing something uncomfortable. The system does not reward effort equally. It rewards positioning. Effort is infinite at the bottom, scarce at the top. At the bottom, millions compete with labor. At the top, few compete with control. That's why the narrative must stay tangled. If wealth looked mechanical, predictable, almost clinical, too many would aim at structure instead of status. So they sell you complexity. Because complexity exhausts. And exhausted men don't strategize. They cope. They scroll. They hope. They normalize slow progress and call it maturity. But here is the fracture in the illusion. If wealth were truly complicated, no one consistently repeatable would achieve it. Yet it happens again and again. Different industries, different eras, same pattern. Control an asset. Scale it. Protect it. Simplicity. The game isn't difficult. It's concealed. And concealment only works on those who accept the script. Your ambition was never meant to die. It was meant to be redirected. A society cannot function if men stop wanting more. Ambition fuels production, innovation, and competition. But unregulated ambition threatens hierarchy, so it must be channeled, like electricity through insulated wires. Safe, predictable, profitable for someone else. You were not taught to suppress ambition. You were taught to aim it at approved targets. Grades, titles, promotions, certifications, corporate milestones, retirement accounts. These are not evil. They are containment structures. Look closely at the path handed to you. Study hard, get credentials, right arrow. Get hired, right arrow, climb, right arrow. Invest passively, right arrow, retire late. This is ambition in captivity. It feels like movement. It feels like growth. It even feels respectable. But it never grants sovereignty. Because every stage depends on permission. Permission to pass. Permission to graduate. Permission to be hired. Permission to be promoted. Permission to keep your position. Permission to access capital. Controlled ambition is ambition that operates within someone else's architecture. You are allowed to run. Just not redesign the track. The system does not fear hard workers. It fears independent asset holders. That is why risk is framed as irresponsibility. Notice the emotional conditioning. Security is moral. Stability is maturity. Risk is reckless. Ownership is uncertain. Control is stressful. The language is psychological fencing. When you consider stepping outside the prescribed ladder, fear is triggered automatically. Not because the move is irrational, but because your nervous system has been trained to equate safety with obedience. This is the mechanism. First, define success as salary. Second, tie survival to employment. Third, normalize debt early. Fourth, glamorize busyness. Fifth, stigmatize deviation. Now ambition works for the system. You wake up hungry, but you hunt where you're told. You compete against thousands for incremental raises, while the few compete for acquisition, equity, and scale. You are taught to polish performance. They focus on positioning. There is a critical difference between being valuable and being powerful. Valuable people are rewarded. Powerful people set terms. Controlled ambition produces valuable men. Uncontrolled ambition produces architects. And architects threaten centralized design. Think about how early debt enters your life. Student loans, car loans, mortgages. Debt is not merely financial, it's behavioral. Debt narrows risk tolerance. A man with monthly obligations cannot gamble strategically. He cannot step back. He cannot withstand instability. His ambition becomes conservative. Predictable. and predictability is exploitable. Now combine this with career conditioning. You are praised for consistency, rewarded for compliance, promoted for fitting culture, disciplined for disruption. Innovation is welcomed if it increases company profit. Rebellion is punished if it increases personal independence. Even entrepreneurship is filtered. Funding ecosystems favor scalable models that integrate into existing systems. True independence, small, profitable, sovereign, is less glamorous, less funded, less celebrated. Why? Because scalable disruption must remain controllable. The mechanism is subtle. You are given hope, but within boundaries. You are told you can become wealthy, but through approved pipelines. You are encouraged to dream big, but not question ownership structures. You are trained to optimize input, rarely to seize output. And the most dangerous illusion: time. You're young, you have time. Slow and steady. Be patient. Patience is virtuous when it compounds assets. It is disastrous when it compounds dependency. A decade of controlled ambition produces expertise. A decade of leveraged ownership produces power. The system does not forbid you from becoming wealthy. It simply makes the default path statistically unlikely to produce sovereignty. You must deviate consciously. And deviation feels like betrayal. Betrayal of family expectations. Betrayal of peer norms. Betrayal of institutional scripts. That psychological friction keeps most men contained. They sense something is off, but they lack the language to articulate it. So they double down. More courses, more certifications, more hustle, more networking, movement without leverage, ambition without asymmetry, effort without ownership. This is how intelligent men remain financially average, not because they lack discipline, but because their ambition was domesticated early. And domesticated ambition never bites the hand that feeds it. The moment you see this mechanism, you face a decision. Continue competing for validation inside someone else's structure, or begin studying how structures are built. One path earns praise, the other earns power. Not all men play the money game the same way. Most don't even know which role they occupy. They think wealth is a ladder. It is. It's a hierarchy of positioning. There are 3 financial archetypes in every era: the worker, the player, the architect. You were trained to become the first. You occasionally admire the second. You rarely understand the third. Let's dissect them. 1. The worker controlled output. The worker sells time. He may be intelligent, skilled, even respected. But his income is directly tied to hours, deliverables, performance metrics. If he stops producing, the flow stops. His power is conditional. Even high-income professionals, lawyers, surgeons, executives, often remain workers in disguise. They earn more, but they still trade presence for payment. The worker optimizes effort. He asks, how can I increase my value? How can I negotiate higher compensation? How can I secure my position? These are survival questions, necessary but limited. The worker's ceiling is determined by external approval, and approval is fragile. Markets shift, companies restructure, technologies automate, health declines. When the worker falls silent, so does his income. He believes he is climbing, but he is running on a treadmill, faster, yes, but still in place. This archetype dominates society because it is safe, and safety scales obedience. 2. The player strategic movement. The player understands leverage, but temporarily. He trades assets, builds businesses, flips opportunities, exploits inefficiencies. He sees gaps and moves quickly. Unlike the worker, he is not loyal to stability. He is loyal to advantage. But the player often chases motion. He jumps from venture to venture, opportunity to opportunity, trend to trend. His wealth fluctuates. He wins big. He loses hard. He reinvents. The player is dangerous, but inconsistent. He understands asymmetry. He embraces risk. He tolerates volatility. But he rarely builds enduring systems. He exploits the game. He does not redesign it. Many ambitious men become players for a season. They taste leverage. They sense freedom. But without structure, they remain exposed to chaos. 3. The architect, structural control. The architect builds systems that produce without constant presence. He owns equity. He controls distribution. He designs infrastructure. He shapes perception. While workers compete for salaries and players chase deals, the architect engineers environments. He asks different questions. What asset can I control? What system can I build? How can scale multiply my decisions? How do I position myself where others must pass through me? The architect seeks choke points. Access, attention, supply, distribution, information. He understands that control over flow is superior to participation in flow. When you control the pipeline, you tax the traffic. That is structural wealth. The architect does not rely on effort. He relies on architecture. This is why simplicity governs wealth. Workers scale effort. Players scale risk. Architects scale systems. Now ask yourself, without ego, where do you stand? If you rely on salary alone, you are a worker. If you rely on deals, commissions, flips, trades, you are a player. If you rely on ownership of systems that function beyond your presence, you are approaching architect status. Most men never leave worker territory, because becoming an architect requires psychological rupture. You must stop seeking approval. Stop worshiping security. Stop measuring yourself by busyness. And most importantly, you must accept delayed validation. Architects look irrational at first. They sacrifice immediate praise for long-term leverage. They endure uncertainty while building foundations. They reject linear growth in favor of asymmetry. Society celebrates workers publicly. It glamorizes players occasionally. But architects operate quietly. This is why wealth appears mysterious. You are shown performance, rarely positioning. You see the worker grinding. You see the player winning headlines. You rarely see the architect designing the board. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The system produces workers by default. It tolerates players in moderation. It depends on a small number of architects to structure everything. The question is not whether you are intelligent enough. The question is whether you are willing to abandon the comfort of the first archetype and the adrenaline of the second to build the third. That shift requires killing certain beliefs. That effort equals reward. That fairness governs outcomes. That credentials create power. That loyalty guarantees security. Architects do not believe these myths. They believe in leverage, in positioning, in asymmetry, in structural advantage. Once you see these archetypes, you cannot pretend neutrality. You are either building systems or feeding them. You were raised on a moral fairy tale. Work hard, be honest, stay loyal. And eventually, you will be rewarded. History does not support this. History rewards control. The men who accumulated wealth across centuries were not the most obedient. They were the most strategically positioned. Merchants who controlled trade routes, bankers who controlled credit, industrialists who controlled production, media barons who controlled perception, tech founders who control platforms. Different eras, same pattern. Control the channel, tax the flow. Honesty is a virtue for stability. Control is a requirement for dominance. This is not cynicism, it is structural observation. Look at power through a Machiavellian lens. Public morality is theater. Private strategy is arithmetic. In every age, the masses are told the story of merit. Meanwhile, the elite operate on leverage. Even the great political thinkers understood this. The Prince was not a celebration of cruelty. It was an instruction manual on preserving power in a world that punishes naivety. Virtue in public, strategy in private. This duality applies to wealth as well. The marketplace is presented as fair competition. But those who truly win are those who influence regulation, control distribution, acquire competitors, own attention, shape narratives. Effort alone does not secure advantage. Structure does. Consider the pattern of industrial consolidation. Small players emerge. They innovate. They compete. Then larger entities acquire them. Why? Because scale eliminates vulnerability. And scale belongs to those who already possess leverage. The worker believes in fairness. The player believes in opportunity. The architect believes in inevitability. Inevitability is engineered. Once you control infrastructure, outcomes become predictable. Think about how modern wealth concentrates around platforms. Those who own marketplaces do not need to create products. They collect rent from transactions. Those who own networks do not need to generate content. They monetize access. Those who own capital do not need to labor. They charge for liquidity. This pattern is ancient. Empires taxed trade routes. Kings taxed land. Banks taxed borrowing. Platforms tax attention. Control the gateway, profit from passage. The honest craftsman may be respected. The infrastructure owner becomes indispensable. And indispensability is power. Here is where the threat deepens. If you continue believing that fairness governs financial outcomes, you will position yourself incorrectly. You will compete horizontally with peers, while the real game is vertical, control above the field. Honesty is not the enemy. Naivety is. If you operate under the assumption that everyone plays by equal rules, you will never look for structural advantage. And structural advantage is where wealth hides. Even economic crises reveal this pattern. When markets crash, workers lose jobs. Players lose volatility bets. Architects buy assets at discount. Why? Because they maintained liquidity. Because they understood cycles. Because they were positioned above the panic. The system rewards those who understand asymmetry during instability, not those who hope for fairness. Human nature compounds this. Most men crave approval. They avoid conflict. They prefer predictable environments. Architects accept discomfort. They tolerate reputational ambiguity. They make decisions that appear cold. They sacrifice popularity for control. History does not remember the obedient majority. It remembers the few who redesign structures. The brutal truth. Wealth has always been extracted through leverage, not earned through virtue alone. Virtue may stabilize reputation, but leverage multiplies resources. If this sounds ruthless, it is because power is not sentimental. You can remain morally upright and still think strategically. But you cannot remain strategically blind and expect sovereignty. The threat is not that others are evil. The threat is that others understand structure while you cling to fairness. One side calculates positioning. The other side calculates effort. And effort loses to architecture every time. If you internalize this chapter, something uncomfortable happens. You stop asking, "Is this fair?" and start asking, "Who controls this?" That question alone shifts you upward. Effort is respected. Leverage is feared. You were trained to value the first and distrust the second. That conditioning keeps you exhausted. The worker mindset asks, "How much more can I do?" The architect mindset asks, "How little must I do for disproportionate return?" This is the strategic shift. From volume to position. From motion to control. From input obsession to structural advantage. Money does not chase effort. It follows leverage. Leverage is the ability to produce results without proportional labor. There are only a few forms of true leverage: capital, code, media, distribution, systems, people organized under direction. Everything else is decorated labor. You can work 14 hours a day and remain replaceable. You can design one scalable asset and become indispensable. That difference is not talent. It is architecture. The first behavioral mutation you must make is this: stop asking how to increase income. Start asking how to reduce dependency. Dependency is the silent tax on ambition. If your survival depends on approval, you will make cautious decisions. If your lifestyle depends on a paycheck, you will avoid asymmetry. If your reputation depends on likability, you will dilute power. Leverage requires detachment, not emotional detachment, structural detachment. You must design income that survives your absence. This does not mean quitting recklessly. It means thinking in parallel. While you operate as a worker, you begin building like an architect. Ownership fragments at first. A small equity stake, a digital asset, a distribution channel, a niche authority position, a scalable product. The size is irrelevant. Control is what matters. Control creates optionality. Optionality creates confidence. Confidence enables risk. And risk, when asymmetric, is the gate to wealth. Here is the mistake most ambitious men make. They chase scale before control. They want viral reach without owning the audience. They want revenue without equity. They want success without sovereignty. Leverage without ownership is borrowed power. Borrowed power can be revoked. True leverage sits on top of owned structure. Consider the difference between earning commission and owning the company. Commission rewards performance. Ownership rewards existence. When the system produces profit, the owner benefits, whether active or absent. That is leverage. You must begin studying choke points. Where does money flow? Who controls the access? Who sets the terms? If you insert yourself into the flow without controlling it, you remain replaceable. If you control the gateway, you become unavoidable. This is why distribution beats creation. Creators compete for attention. Distributors control attention. This is why capital beats labor. Labor requests payment. Capital dictates conditions. This is why systems beat talent. Talent exhausts. Systems compound. The strategic shift also demands psychological recalibration. You must become comfortable appearing slow while building something durable. Workers chase visible progress. Architects engineer invisible infrastructure. To outsiders, it looks like stagnation. To insiders, it is positioning. You must tolerate being misunderstood. You must reject the dopamine of immediate praise. You must think in asymmetry. Asymmetry means this: limited downside, massive upside, a calculated risk where failure is survivable, but success is transformative. Most men avoid this because they fear embarrassment more than poverty. Embarrassment is temporary. Structural weakness is permanent. Begin small. Identify one asset you can control, one channel you can build, one system that can function without constant presence. Protect cash flow while building leverage. Do not romanticize chaos. Strategic patience is not passivity. It is positioning. And once leverage begins to compound, something changes internally. You stop fearing termination. You stop begging for promotion. You stop negotiating from weakness. Because your survival no longer depends on a single structure. That is sovereignty. The world respects men who cannot be cornered. Leverage makes you difficult to control. And difficulty is power. The system cannot openly forbid leverage, but it will distract you from building it. With busyness, with comfort, with small raises, with safe recognition. If you accept those rewards, you remain domesticated. If you reject comfort long enough to build architecture, you step upward. The shift from effort to leverage is not financial. It is psychological. You stop seeing yourself as a participant. You start seeing yourself as a designer. And designers do not compete. They construct arenas others must enter. There is a version of you that must die. Not physically, structurally. The employee. He is obedient. He seeks validation. He measures himself by external metrics. He feels safe when supervised. He fears instability more than mediocrity. He is efficient. And he is controllable. The employee identity is not about having a job. It is about psychological dependence. You can own a business and still think like an employee. You can earn 6 figures and still wait for permission. The employee believes, if I perform well enough, I will be secure. If I stay loyal, I will be protected. If I avoid risk, I will avoid loss. This is survival logic. It is not sovereignty logic. Survival logic optimizes comfort. Sovereignty logic optimizes control. The employee seeks stability from external structures. The architect builds stability internally through assets, leverage, and positioning. The most dangerous chain is not financial. It is emotional. Approval addiction. You are rewarded your entire life for compliance. Gold stars, grades, performance reviews, bonuses, praise from superiors. You learn to equate obedience with worth. So when you consider stepping outside the structure, your nervous system resists. Not because it is wrong, because it is unfamiliar. The employee fears 3 things: uncertainty, judgment, responsibility without safety nets. Architects live inside all 3. Uncertainty is information. Judgment is noise. Responsibility is leverage. To kill the employee within, you must dismantle internal habits. Stop seeking reassurance before action. Stop needing consensus. Stop overvaluing credentials. Stop equating busyness with progress. The employee asks, what do they expect from me? The architect asks, what do I design? That shift sounds subtle. It is violent, because it removes excuses. If you are responsible for your structure, You cannot blame bosses, markets, or timing forever. You must calculate. You must act. You must absorb impact. Most men prefer dependency because it distributes blame. If you fail inside a system, you say, "The company collapsed. The market shifted. My manager blocked me." When you build your own leverage, failure is personal. But so is victory. Killing the employee means accepting full authorship. It also means redefining security. Security is not a paycheck. It is optionality. If one income stream disappears, do you collapse? If one client leaves, do you panic? If one platform bans you, are you erased? If the answer is yes, you are structurally fragile. Fragility is the opposite of power. The employee identity clings to singular dependencies. The architect identity diversifies control. This does not mean reckless diversification. It means layered leverage. Income not tied to hours. Assets not tied to one gatekeeper. Reputation not tied to one institution. You must also eliminate emotional loyalty to structures that would replace you in a week. Corporations speak the language of family, but act with the logic of efficiency. Do not confuse branding with allegiance. Respect systems. Do not worship them. The employee seeks comfort in belonging. The architect seeks strength in independence. This transition feels isolating. Your peers may call you unrealistic. Your family may urge caution. Your colleagues may mock your deviation. That is the cost of mutation. Predators leave the herd, not because they hate the herd, because they understand vulnerability. To kill the employee within is to accept strategic solitude. You may still operate inside companies, but you do not psychologically kneel. You extract experience. You build capital. You develop leverage. You prepare exits. You are inside the structure, but not owned by it. This is the difference between participation and captivity. Once the employee dies, something changes. You stop asking for permission to pursue leverage. You stop over-explaining your ambition. You stop negotiating your worth with those who cannot calculate your upside. You begin designing your life around ownership, not approval. And that is dangerous, because men who do not need validation are difficult to manipulate. Men who do not fear instability are difficult to control. Men who build leverage are difficult to replace. The employee identity is comfortable. The architect identity is powerful. You cannot keep both. Not everyone will make this shift. Most will nod. Few will act. That is not tragedy. It is selection. Wealth is not distributed evenly because discipline is. Power is not common because responsibility is. Sovereignty is rare because dependency is comfortable. You now understand the structure. Wealth is simple. Ambition is controlled. Archetypes define positioning. History rewards leverage. Effort loses to architecture. The employee must die. The knowledge is not complex. Execution is. And execution filters men. Here is the final warning. Understanding the game without changing behavior is more dangerous than ignorance. Because now, if you remain average, it is not confusion. It is choice. You will be tempted to consume more information. More books. More videos. More strategies. Analysis feels like progress. It is often disguised procrastination. Architects do not drown in theory. They select one leverage path. They commit. They build quietly. They tolerate slow beginnings. They reject applause. They compound control. Selection begins with discomfort. When you start building ownership, income may fluctuate. Your peers may advance faster in visible careers. Your family may question your decisions. This is the test. Most retreat here. They return to the predictable ladder, because predictability feels safe. But safety without leverage is slow suffocation. You must decide which pain you prefer: the short-term pain of strategic uncertainty, or the long-term pain of structural dependency. There is no painless path, only different trade-offs. Wealth selects men who can endure delayed validation, who can think in asymmetry, who can detach from approval, who can calculate risk without emotion dominating the equation. The masses will continue optimizing resumes. The players will continue chasing volatility. The architects will continue acquiring control points. And control compounds silently. Here is the brutal truth. You will not drift into wealth. You will drift into dependency. Wealth requires deliberate deviation. It requires stepping outside narratives. It requires questioning structures that once felt sacred. And once you begin, there is no returning to innocence. You will see leverage everywhere. You will see dependency everywhere. You will see how effort is praised while ownership is hidden. That awareness creates tension. But tension is power. If you ignore this knowledge, you will slowly rationalize your position. You will say, "It's not that simple. It's different for me. I'll start later." And years will pass. The system does not need to oppress you. It only needs you to delay. Delay compounds dependency. Action compounds leverage. This is the dividing line. No one will force you to choose sovereignty. No one will stop you either. But understand this. The moment you see wealth as structural rather than mystical, excuses evaporate. You either begin building assets, or you consciously accept your place inside someone else's architecture. There is no neutral ground. Wealth is not about motivation. It is about positioning, not about inspiration, about ownership, not about working harder, about controlling flows. Few will internalize this deeply enough to act. Fewer will endure long enough to see compounding. Those who do will not look extraordinary. They will look patient, calculated, unemotional, sovereign. The game is simple. The concealment is sophisticated. Now the concealment is removed. What you do next determines which archetype you remain. Selection has already begun.